Before you listen to this, take a slow breath, because what you're feeling isn't random. There's a reason one person still lives in your chest, even after the silence. Some connections don't end with goodbye. They begin in the quiet that follows. You can block a number, but you can't block a soul that once felt like home. If their name still feels heavy in your heart, this message is for you. Distance can silence voices, but it cannot silence what was real. The hardest connections to forget are the ones that changed you without warning. Somewhere right now, someone you're trying not to think about is struggling with the same silence. Not every love story ends loudly. Some end in unfinished sentences and unanswered feelings. And if you felt that sudden wave of emotion lately, maybe it's not memory, maybe it's connection. There are some connections in this world that don't end when conversations stop. They don't disappear when the messages fade. They don't dissolve just because two people decide to stay silent. Some connections grow louder in the quiet. And maybe lately you've felt something strange. A heaviness that doesn't belong to your day. A sudden wave of emotion that rises from nowhere. You're busy, you're functioning, you're doing everything you're supposed to do. But underneath it all, there's a pull. Soft, persistent, unexplainable. It feels like someone is thinking about you, like someone is struggling, like something unfinished is breathing between you, and you try to shake it off. You tell yourself it's just nostalgia, just memory, just loneliness. But it doesn't feel like that. It feels alive. Because some bonds don't break when people stop talking. They simply move inward. They move beneath the surface. And somewhere, the person connected to you is fighting something they don't even fully understand. They wake up in the morning and tell themselves they're fine. They scroll, they work, they laugh with people around them. They convince themselves they've moved on. But then, there's a quiet moment. Maybe it's when they're driving alone. Maybe it's when the room gets still at night. Maybe it's when a certain song plays unexpectedly. And suddenly, you don't appear as a thought. You appear as a feeling. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just deep. You're not haunting them. You're reminding them. Reminding them of a version of themselves that felt more alive, more open, more honest. And that reminder is uncomfortable, because what they felt with you wasn't shallow, it wasn't casual, it wasn't replaceable, it was real. And real things leave marks. As Carl Jung once said, what we resist not only persists, but grows larger. They try to resist this. They try to minimize it. They try to label it as timing, as circumstance, as something that simply wasn't meant to be. But emotions don't shrink just because we refuse to look at them. They wait. And silence. Silence doesn't erase attachment. It removes distraction. From the outside, your person looks composed, controlled, stable. They might even look happier than before. But inside, something is divided. One part of them wants control, wants safety, wants predictability. The other part remembers how they felt with you, how they didn't have to pretend, how conversations flowed effortlessly, how their guards softened without force. And these two parts, they are not in agreement. They are at war. Philosophers have long spoken about this inner fragmentation, the pain of living against your own emotional truth. And right now, they are trying to build a life that excludes you. While their emotional body hasn't signed that agreement, they keep asking themselves questions they don't voice out loud. Why did this feel different? Why do I still feel them when they're gone? Why hasn't time done what time is supposed to do? Because they expected missing you to be temporary. They expected distraction to solve it. They expected logic to override emotion. But emotional memory doesn't respond to logic. Your presence became associated with something deeper. Maybe peace, maybe safety, Maybe the rare experience of being understood without explanation. And once the nervous system learns that kind of safety, it doesn't forget easily. That's why ordinary days feel heavier now. That's why stillness feels uncomfortable. That's why they keep moving but feel stuck. You didn't break them. You awakened them. And awakening is rarely comfortable. Not every connection changes a person. Most are seasonal, situational, replaceable. But some connections reach places inside us that were sleeping. You didn't just enter their life. You activated something. Maybe it was the part of them that wanted to love honestly. Maybe it was the part that longed to be seen without performing. Maybe it was the part that had been protecting itself for years, until you came along and made it feel safe enough to open. And now that you're not there, they feel the absence of that openness. They feel the echo of it. As Plato once believed, love can feel like the recognition of a soul we've known before. Whether you see that spiritually or psychologically, the effect is the same. Familiarity beyond logic. That's why they're struggling. Because they didn't expect you to matter this much. They didn't expect you to stay in their system this long. They thought time would blur your edges. But instead, time sharpened the outline. Now they find themselves remembering small details. The way you spoke when you were excited. The way silence between you never felt awkward. The way they felt seen in your presence. And that memory isn't gentle. It's heavy. There's a very specific kind of suffering that happens when someone refuses to admit what they feel. They create stories to stay in control. It wasn't that deep. It wouldn't have worked. I'm better off. But emotions don't obey stories. They obey truth. And deep down, they know this connection was rare. Rare doesn't mean perfect. Rare doesn't mean easy, but rare means unforgettable. And the hardest part, they don't hate you. They resent themselves. Because somewhere inside, they know they weren't ready. Not ready to be that vulnerable. Not ready to hold something that real. Not ready to choose something that required courage. So instead, they chose comfort. They chose pride. They chose silence. And now silence is teaching them what presence once did. There's a quote by Søren Kierkegaard that says, "The most painful state of being is remembering the future you'll never have." That's where they are. They're not just missing you. They're grieving a version of themselves that only existed when you were there. The version that was softer, braver, more open. And grief doesn't always look like tears. Sometimes it looks like pretending everything is fine. Sometimes it looks like smiling in public and feeling empty in private. Sometimes it looks like scrolling through distractions just to avoid the quiet. But the quiet always returns. And when it does, you're there. Not as a memory, as a feeling. And grief doesn't always look like tears. Sometimes it looks like pretending everything is fine. Sometimes it looks like smiling in public and feeling empty in private. Sometimes it looks like scrolling through distractions just to avoid the quiet. But the quiet always returns. And when it does, you're there. Not as a memory, as a feeling. If this touched something inside you, don't ignore that feeling. Some connections don't need constant contact to stay alive. They live in the spaces between words, in the silence you both pretend doesn't matter. And if you felt that heaviness lately, maybe it's not weakness. Maybe it's truth rising. Maybe someone out there is learning your value the hard way. So tell me, have you felt them too? Have you sensed that unspoken pull? Comment, "I felt it," if this resonated with your heart. And let's see how many silent souls are connected here.